Much, President Duval, for your excellent remarks there. Now, committee, before we continue with introducing the witnesses today and with the consent of my colleagues, I'd like to share with you now a very brief clip from the documentary entitled Kiss the Ground. My dear friend, Congress Lady Jayapal of the state of Washington, brought this film to my attention. I watched it on Netflix. I was very impressed with what they had to say, and I've invited them to show this very impressive film. It will introduce you to the possibilities of how we must balance our climate, replenish our water supplies, deal with the carbon, and most importantly, continue being the champions of feeding the world by taking care of our soil. Please start the clip now, would you?
There's so much bad news about our planet. It's so warm. Truth is, I've given up. This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet. The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil. Fossil fuels are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
But when we destroy soil, it releases carbon dioxide.
Biosequestration is using plants, trees, and techniques of grazing and farming to capture carbon and store it in the soil.
We can fix a lot of our climate issues to bring the CO2 down into a living plant and put it back into the soil where it belongs.
Plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy human, healthy climate.
There could be a way to eat food that heals the planet.
The problem isn't the animal. The problem is where the animals are at.
How do we take waste and repurpose and reuse it, because it's really not waste? The poop has to stay in the land.
Compost is just one of a suite of soil-based carbon capture solutions.
We know how to continue to step over here. We can reverse global warming.
We can get back to the Garden of Eden that it once was by regeneration. To see if I return to places completely devastated, that gives me hope.
Our health and the health of our planet are connected.
If you look over here, my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallow, then you look over at our paddock, you have a diversity of different plant species. Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
I'll make you a deal. I won't give up, and neither should you.
Thank you very much for that. And what a very informative message. And I would encourage as many of you to see the complete film, Kiss the Ground. It is now airing on Netflix. And now we will return to hearing the testimony of the remaining two witnesses who are here with us today. Mr. Brown, you may begin your testimony now.
Thank you, Honorable Chairman Scott and members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. Since 1991, my family and I have owned and operated a ranch near Bismarck, North Dakota. As a farmer and rancher, I have been affected by the extreme variability in weather. Drought, flooding, extreme cold and heat. The change in our climate is affecting everyone and every farm. Agriculture is often vilified as being a major contributor to climate change. But you can help agriculture become a major part of the solution. First slide, please. On the left side of this picture are my soils today. On the right side are my neighbors. These samples were taken only a few feet apart. The only difference is management, or as I like to call it, stewardship. In 1993, my soil organic matter levels were at 1.7%. Today, they are near 7%. My neighbors are at or below 1.7%. Today, my soils can infiltrate over 30 inches of water per hour, while my neighbors can infiltrate less than 1/2 of an inch per hour. So how did farmers like me take large amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and use it to regenerate our soils? The answer is we use 6 proven, time-tested ecological principles. These principles will work on every farm in every one of your districts. Next slide, please. We start with context. We're not planting orchards in the desert. That is out of context. We're making our farms more resilient. But programs like crop insurance are not rewarding farmers for positive outcomes, and they are not based on environmental constraints. We are serious about not only reducing and eliminating tillage, but also significantly reducing all synthetic fertilizers and pesticides as they harm soil biology, our ecosystems, and our health. I am holding a pint jar of treated soybean seed. The neonicotinoid on this seed has the capability of killing 72 million bees. This has to stop. Next slide. Alan Savory said it well when he said, "It's not drought that causes bare ground, it's bare ground that causes drought." We are keeping our soils covered with diverse living cover crops and grain crops, thus continuing to pump carbon into the soil while protecting our soils from erosion, conserving moisture, and holding nitrates, phosphates, and other nutrients on our farms. We are prioritizing diversity. This committee can help every farm, ranch, and CRP land to significantly increase the biodiversity of plants, insects, and soil biology. We realize the importance of grazing animals. Our richest, healthiest soils were formed in partnership with grazing ruminants. Proper use of grazing ruminants is one of the keys to carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. Down to 36 inches and beyond, adaptive regenerative grazing is seeing total carbon gains significantly higher than rotational or continuous grazing. Next slide. This is the Chihuahuan Desert. Many think that with only 6 to 8 inches of annual rainfall, it was always a desert. Next slide. The dark colored soil near the surface is carbon. This means it was recently a vast grassland. The erosion you see took only 60 years. You can drive through this desert and then you open a gate to Alejandro Carrillo's ranch. Next slide. The difference is stewardship. He is using livestock to regenerate his soils and increase biomass. Whereas neighbors need 300 acres to feed 1 cow per year, he only needs 30. As a result, regenerative farmers are substantially increasing the profitability of our farms and ranches, thus helping to revitalize our rural communities while producing food that is higher in nutrient density. We have done this while reducing our reliance on government programs. These programs should be a hand up or a reward for positive results. While more resources are needed, just increasing funding isn't going to solve it. We need to put that funding into what actually regenerates landscapes. We must make the adoption of regenerative ag available for all farmers from all backgrounds. From farmers to scientists to environmentalists to the government, we hear, "I didn't know." Well, at one time, I didn't know either. We must educate not only farmers and ranchers, but all society, as to these concepts which are rooted in indigenous knowledge. And it's not just about emission reductions. It's about our land's resilience and ability to function. Regenerating our soil ecosystem is the most cost-effective national investment we can make to mitigate climate change and heal society. The current system is broken. We need to change the way we see things. Regenerative agriculture is a win for all, and this committee, Mr. Chairman, can help lead the way. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your excellent testimony. And now we'll hear from Mr. Schellenberger. Please begin now. And members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members, and each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, each in order to allow us to get in as many questions as we can. And I want to start by just stressing the importance of we in agriculture. This hearing has been put together to address all of the impacts with climate change, but to make sure that we are addressing climate change directly as it impacts agriculture and our food security first. And so, let me start with you, Mr. Brown. You were featured in the documentary, Kiss the Ground. And in that clip that we just saw, the narrator spoke of a simple solution for many of the climate changes we are experiencing. And that's what we are looking for today at this hearing, solutions. And what that announcer said was this, and I quote, "The solution is right under our feet." Can you unpack that for us?
I sure can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That solution is under our feet. That solution is biology, and it is regenerative agriculture. The way this works is that living plants take in sunlight through photosynthesis. They bring in the carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. They produce all these compounds, and then they pump that into the soil. Studies have shown, Dr. Teague in 2016 showed that we can sequester over half of the carbon emissions annually in the U.S. through regenerative agriculture, through using these 6 principles that I laid out. This is not rocket science. It's simply using time-tested ecological principles to heal our planet.
Now, let me ask you this, because I've been working very intimately with our farming interests. And there are 2 that come to mind. And I was wondering if this is an example of what you're talking about. One is with Bayer. Bayer has developed sequestration, regenerative, and something called no-till farming, I believe. But at any rate, what they're doing is partnering with the farmers to get the solution that goes to your point. It's in the ground. It's there. Agriculture is agriculture for 2 reasons: the water coming from the heavens and the carbon in the ground. Everything comes from that. And so I wanted your opinion on what Bayer is doing, and I found out yesterday that some of my friends in the peanut industry are doing something similar. So my point is this the kind of thing that other interests in our farming sectors should be doing?
Mr. Chairman, we all need to work together to further these practices of regenerative agriculture. No-till farming first came to the United States in 1962. We have only approximately 25% of the agricultural cropland today in no-till systems. No-till is a small piece of the puzzle, but we have to do much more than that. We have to keep the soil covered. We have to grow diverse cash crops, diverse cover crops, and then we have to integrate livestock onto those systems. Yes, Bayer and other companies, such as General Mills, are doing good things by partnering with farmers and ranchers. This needs to continue. It needs to be all of society coming together for the betterment of all.
I'm going to end there because I want to make sure we get our members in, as many as we can. So I will yield to you, Ranking Member Thompson.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all five witnesses. All five of you, just great testimony. It just reaffirms, very frankly, what you're talking about are the things that this committee has been dedicated to. I think at least 5 or 6 years ago, it was this committee that had the first hearing on healthy soils. For any additional responses.
Mr. Ranking Member, thank you. And yes, the agencies such as NRCS have done a good job, but we need to do much more in the way of education. We have to educate farmers and ranchers as to these time-tested ecological principles in order to move it forward. It's an absolute travesty that right now we have such a small amount of our landscape covered with cover crops. I fly extensively, and you fly anywhere, the amount of bare soil we see is absolutely appalling. There's no reason for that. We need to do more and work with these agencies to further education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to insert a statement from the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, NASDA. For the record, NASDA statement supports the expansion of federal tools that incentivize climate-smart practices. And now, I'd like to recognize Mr. Costa from California. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Is she not there? Mr. Costa, are you there?
I think it's a long overdue conversation. And I want to take just a moment to underscore the sense of urgency that we should all be feeling. We have an extremely narrow window to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change, full stop. That means we need to achieve net zero emissions across our entire economy, including agriculture. And it means we need to prepare our farmers for the impacts of even the best case scenario of 1.5 degrees. That level of warming will still be hugely consequential, and it's already happening. Now, this might be news to some of my colleagues, but it's not news to farmers. Farmers are not the ones who got us into this mess, but now they're on the front lines of the climate crisis. We need to think big to help them build resilience into everything that they do, and we need to ensure that they have a seat at the table. Now, Mr. Brown, I want to thank you for sharing your story of making ecological balance the heart of land stewardship. I think there are both economic and ecological benefits that can be achieved here, and I'm reminded of the work that went into developing standards for organic producers, which was a collaborative process. Many organic producers live by the practice you mentioned while adhering to strict program standards. When farmers transition to organic, they're taking a risk, but having standards means that they have a roadmap and a path to build in consumer trust. So I want to make sure that we're providing real guidance and real support to farmers who are eager to follow your example. I think we need to have a roadmap that has integrity. So could you please discuss what work lies ahead to develop standards for adopting regenerative techniques that will produce clarity to both farmers and consumers? Again, organic farming is good for the environment, and consumers have confidence in it because of the standards. I wonder if you could respond with your thoughts to that question.
Thank you, Representative McGovern. First, I need to just briefly jump back and address, there was a couple prior questions that were brought up that I did not get a chance to answer. Representative Costa talked about the need to sustain what we're doing and to be sustainable. I'm sorry, but I've spent a great deal of time in the Central Valley of California, and with all due respect, that's some of the most degraded land in the United States. Do any water infiltration test there and you will see how degraded those soils are. Representative Scott, I did not at all say we needed to end crop insurance. That's not what I said at all. I simply said that we need to make it outcome-based, and that outcome cannot be solely yield, because yield comes at a detriment to the environment. We also have to realize that in regenerative agricultures, we increase the amount of nutrient-dense food grown per acre. There's a misconception out there that regenerative practices mean less yield. That's not at all true. I produce now literally 30 times as much nutrient-dense food per acre than I did before I started these regenerative practices. Now, Mr. McGovern, to answer your question, yes, we do need standards. The business that I work for, Understanding Ag, we work with a lot of organic producers, leading them down this path. Organic is good, but we can do better because we can minimize the amount of tillage that they're doing. We can also increase diversity, increase the use of cover crops, produce more nutrient-dense food, and then through acts such as the PRIME Act, we will be able to add value to the goods that they're producing. Regenerative agriculture is a time-tested, proven pathway to heal not only our land in respects to climate change, but we can heal our communities, the profitability on our farms and ranches, water quality, water quantity issues, and many of the other things that we're currently facing as a challenge in society today.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer very much. And again, I think my time is up, but I just think it's important for all of us here to be focused on actually building a roadmap with standards, because otherwise we're just talking the talk and we're not walking the walk. And again, I think the organic example is an example that we should follow. But thank you very much.
And we do have that roadmap.
Thank you.
All farmers be able to participate in carbon markets? And do you think that there are specific steps that Congress and USDA can advance to ensure that farmers of color and small, mid-sized, diversified, and beginning farmers can participate and be rewarded for implementing climate stewardship practices?
Thank you, Representative Adams. And yes, that is certainly a major concern of mine as well. It does not matter the size and scale a farm is at. They should be rewarded based on their practices and their outcomes. Small farms, in my opinion, have the ability to produce greater outcomes. They should be rewarded accordingly. I would urge that this committee looks to ensure that these small farms have the ability to be rewarded for what they're actually doing, and that you make sure that any carbon market, the vast majority of the income that can be had from selling carbon credits goes back to the farmer themselves.
Thank you. I think I'm out of time.
Who are here to.
I'll do two straight with you. Yes, please. Go ahead, Ms. Hayes. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay. Climate change is an important threat to Connecticut. From June 2016 through May 2017, Connecticut experienced its longest drought since 2000. At one point, more than 70% of the state was considered an extreme or severe drought. Simultaneously, the average temperature in Connecticut is continually rising. Since 1970, Connecticut has warmed by 8 degrees, compared with the national average increase of 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. To compound these issues, more frequent extreme weather is already costing Connecticut huge amounts of money. Between 2017 and 2019, Connecticut experienced 2 severe storms and 2 winter storms. The damages led to losses of at least $1 billion. Small farmers in Connecticut are leading the charge in sustainable agricultural practices, but we cannot leave the health of the planet up to individual decisions. As the members of this agricultural committee, it is our responsibility to ensure that the industry is providing clear solutions to address climate issues. My question today is for Mr. Brown. A report from the USDA recognized increased food insecurity as a risk posed by climate change. As a farmer who is practicing and teaching resiliency, can you explain how climate change could impact levels of food production and ultimately increase global food insecurity if we do not act?
Thank you for your comment. The way for farmers and ranchers to not only mitigate climate change by taking more carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil is to make our soils more resilient. In 2020, Burley County, North Dakota, where I ranch, it was the second driest year ever recorded. Yet, even though that happened, we were still able to graze the same amount of livestock. We were still able to raise profitable cash crops because of the resiliency we had built into our soils by taking massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and putting into our soils. The other thing that many of us who are in practicing regenerative agriculture are doing is that we're diversifying our farms and ranches. So many of our farms and ranches today are not diversified. They only grow 1 or 2 different cash crops. They only grow or raise 1 species of livestock. We need to diversify that. And by so doing, that's going to allow society to have the food security we need.
Thank you.
Been very interesting and informational, and really appreciate that we have a lot more agreement than we often think that we do. And many of the topics that we've brought up have shown our similar thoughts. I won't get a chance to ask everyone a question, but I do want to thank all the presenters. You've really given us such a great cross-section from weather professionals to the importance of the cooperative extension service, the farmer's perspective, and Zippy, I really appreciate, I know I got to have a meeting with you. It was a long time ago because we can't meet anymore, but the work you've done with the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance is really a great way to bring all the commodity groups and the farmers thinking together. And I think that's really advanced a lot of our thinking on this. So thank you so much on that. I've worked on this topic for a long time. I care deeply about it, and I encourage many of you to sign on to my piece of legislation, the Agricultural Resilience Act. I think there's a lot of things we agree on that you all have been talking about on both sides of the aisle: research, soil health, viability for our farms, pasture-based livestock, food loss and waste, which is a big topic that our cooperative extension agent mentioned. So there are really a lot of ways that are farmer-driven that we can work on this. I want to try my first question on Mr. Brown. Thank you so much for really representing the point of view of what it takes for a farmer to make this transition. I want you to know I'm a longtime fan of yours here. Got your book. If you were in the same room, I'd ask you to sign it, and I'd give it to one of my favorite farmers because I've really enjoyed reading it. But and I also want to thank you for giving a shout out to the Prime Act. We're not talking about that today, but that really addresses the importance of having more infrastructure available to farmers and farmers who want to sell directly to consumers. There's a real dearth of slaughtering capability in our country, particularly for small and medium-sized farmers. So appreciate that you brought that up. You've gotten such a good explanation here, I think, to people about the work that you've done. But I know for a lot of farmers, it's very hard to make this transition. You've invested a lot, farmers have in the way they do things. Maybe it's generational. So making this shift is a big leap. And I know you do a lot with talking to farmers about how you made the transition. What do you think we need to do to help support farmers in those transitions through the programs that we have or other things that we could be doing more of?
Thank you. I'd be happy to sign a copy of my book for you anytime. The number one thing that's needed And Mr. Duvall touched on this. It's education. You don't know what you don't know. You know, I owe a debt of gratitude to NRCS. There's many good people who work for that agency. They're moving in the right direction, but they need to be given the opportunity to educate farmers and ranchers. We need to really refocus conservation programs to maximize the adoption of these regenerative principles. You know, everyone here agrees that these principles work. Some have said, well, these principles, cover crops may not work in my area. Well, they missed the principle of context. You have to grow the species that work in your area. Farmers and ranchers are not going to know that intuitively. Okay, we have to use programs, use agencies like NRCS, the Extension Service, to educate farmers and ranchers. And I think it's important to note that by doing so, farmers and ranchers are able to significantly decrease their inputs. I can't say that enough. For instance, look at corn today. The average cost to produce a bushel of corn is near $5. Yet I know many regenerative farmers who are doing it for less than $2 an acre because they are educated and have the information that it takes in order to cut those input costs. So thank you for the work you're doing. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't have much time left, but let me give it to Zippy if he wants to talk at all about the food and agriculture work that you've been doing and just how that's brought so many different commodity groups and farmers together to talk about these things.
If you look at the...
My question's for Mr. Brown. In your testimony, you mentioned the benefits of sustainable practices and how they can help sequester carbon, increase water capacity and absorption, build resilience, and mitigate risk. These themes are consistent with the goals of something that I wrote out of my office called the Rural Green Partnership. That's a framework of policies and principles that are geared toward getting rural America involved in the climate conversation and making sure that we play a part in spurring economic growth in our part of the country. So as a member of Congress who represents a district where ag is our main economic driver, and as chair of one of the subcommittees on this committee, the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, these are all issues that are top of mind for me because they're top of mind for the growers and producers that I'm lucky enough to represent in northwestern and central Illinois. So over the past few weeks, we've been hosting a series of roundtables, and in every single one of them, our growers and our producers are talking about how they're engaging in sustainable best practice like cover cropping, no-till farming, but they don't feel that the federal incentives match up with the work that they're putting in on the farm. So, Mr. Brown, and then I would like you to go first, and then maybe Mr. Duvall, if you have something to add. Here's my question for the two of you. Where do you see potential for increased federal investment and incentives to help more farmers adopt these practices while also rewarding those who have already been active in this space? That is also something that we've gotten some questions on. Again, Mr. Brown, if you can go first, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Where it begins is as I said before, in education. You don't know what you don't know. We need to educate farmers and ranchers as to these principles. We need to show them that by applying these principles, they can significantly not only mitigate climate change, but they can significantly lower their input costs and increase their profitability. We seem to get hung up here on production and yield in pounds. And yes, we need to feed America, but what most don't realize is that production increases as we use these regenerative practices. Also, not only does production increase, but the nutrient density of our foods increases significantly. And I think that's been totally overlooked. We want to help the underserved. Let's increase the nutrient density. The only way we can increase nutrient density of foods is through healthy soils on land-based produced foods. Take a look at the work that Dr. Stefan Van Vliet is doing at Duke University Medical Center, using a mass spectrometer to measure over 2,500 different phytonutrient compounds in food. He is doing work currently that is showing a significant difference between food grown in the current production model and food grown in the regenerative model. Farmers and ranchers need to learn about this, and then they need to be rewarded with an outcome based for the principles that they produce, for the principles that they enact. We cannot keep going down this model where the only incentive is based on yield in pounds. It does no good if we're feeding our society cardboard. Take a look at the facts. We're spending twice as much on healthcare as we are on food. Now, I'm all in favor of lowering the cost of food from the standpoint that, but we have to do it in a way that brings profitability back to the farm and ranch. I agree totally with Mr. Duvall on that. We have to increase profitability to the farms and ranches. He talked about margins being razor thin. Well, I'm sorry, one of the reasons I don't accept any government programs or subsidies is because I have decent margins because I've been able to lower my input costs due to the fact that I've enacted these principles. It all goes back to education. Thank you for your question. Please, this committee has the ability to make sure that we educate through NRCS, through extension, and through other means. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Duvall, I'm going to pass on you answering any more because I have 8 seconds left. And Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
How to steward our nation's resources. Mr. Brown, I have to say, not to invite myself over, but I do hope that one day I can visit what you're doing there. It seems like you're doing some great work. You mentioned that your regenerative farming practices are able to produce more per acre while also increasing profit and being more effective. Is that what I understood?
That is correct, and we're doing it in Texas also.
Okay, well, that's even closer, so maybe I'll have to stop by. So there's a built-in incentive already to move this way. Am I correct?
That is correct. I didn't get any incentives. I did it all on my own. I did though, early on, take advantage of EQIP and CSP contracts through NRCS. That was an important part of me starting down this path. But as soon as I was financially able to do it on my own, I would rather see that money go for other underserved or people who are starting out.
So there's some initial costs getting started, but once you got started, it was self-sustaining is I guess what you're saying, right?
That is correct.
And you were able, I mean, this was just a motivation in your heart to do, right? This was voluntary, this was...
No, okay. No, my story was I started no-tilling actually in 1993. That I started on my own because it made good sense in my semi-brittle environment. Then what happened the years 1995 through 1998, I lost 3 years crops to hail and 1 more year to drought. And financially, I was going broke. And I had to figure a way, how can I make my soils, my resource productive without all the expensive inputs? And that sent me on an education and learning process. At times, learning from land grant institutions, at times learning from other producers, learning from ARS. ARS was very important in my learning. And I picked up bits and pieces and learned these principles and learned that they can truly work anywhere in the world where there's land-based agriculture.
Thank you very much. I like to say that the road to $30 trillion of debt is paved with good intentions. Of course, we do have a role to play here in the federal government, and there are important investments we need to make. Mr. Duvall, or I'm not sure if you're the best one to answer this, do you have an estimate on how much it would cost to establish and operate a carbon bank?
I was going to ask a little bit about carbon credits, but I don't know that I have time for that. Can I ask just maybe in 30 seconds, maybe Mr. Brown, can you tell me a little bit about biochar and whether that's being implemented widely, whether that's something that could even be scaled?
Thank you. Biochar is certainly a tool that can be used in the right context. Again, it comes back to carbon. So in your situation, obviously in Washington State, you have sources of that carbon available where biochar could be made. I would use that as a tool starting out. I would look at the Johnson Sioux bioreactor of adding biology, and then also a hidden gem you have is the bread lab there in Washington State. The work that Dr. Stephen Jones is doing is just unbelievable with perennial grains.
Oh, fantastic. I have one more thing. I'm running out of time, which is just that I agree with everybody today that we need to have farmers at the table, and that's why I have invited Robert Bonney, USDA's Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Senior Advisor on Climate to my district in order to sit down at a roundtable with my farmers to talk about climate policy, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and our farmers need to be at the table. I would like to submit that letter for the record. Madam Chair. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to recognize.
Sit down on my seat. Hey, thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Appreciate your preparation and your contribution. I know it's been a long hearing, and I appreciate your patience with this. So appreciate your preparation and, of course, your participation in a very, very important hearing. And obviously, thanks to the chairman for holding it, as well as the ranking member, GT. Look, I think if there's anybody concerned, at least in my experience with my producers on the Central Coast of California, if there's anybody concerned with fresh air, healthy soils, and clean water, it's our producers. And I think that's been made evident today with the similar sentiments that have been expressed not only from our witnesses, but from the members on both sides of the aisle. And I believe in my conversations and my work with my ag producers, they value and understand a concept that maybe some of you have or have not heard about. It's called usufruct. And basically, it's the temporary right to use the land, USA, to produce fructus, usufruct. And what that means is that I believe our producers understand that they're here, they use the land, but they also got to preserve it for our future because they know it's not theirs. It's a temporary right. And that's important because I believe that when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, I can tell you our producers understand that. And our producers, therefore, as we've heard throughout this hearing, need to be at the table. And I also want to give a shout out and acknowledge our new USDA Secretary, Bill Sack, for his vision to ensure that our farmers are at the table. And I believe it's our obligation to ensure that our producers, especially mine on the Central Coast of many, many specialty crops, are at the table. And as many of you have heard me say, and it's the first second hearing in which we're having at this agricultural committee, I can say people know that I come from the salad bowl of the world. And therefore, we have a number of specialty crops. And so obviously, those types of producers have been progressive when it comes to maintaining and preserving the earth that they use to produce their fruits and vegetables. And so I want to just focus on Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown right now, obviously, when it comes to specialty crops, I know you're from North Dakota. My wife's from North Dakota up in Rugby. There's not many specialty crops up there. But when it comes to specialty crops, what type of smart agricultural efforts are there when it comes to the concern for the climate crisis?
The same principles apply whether we're doing specialty crops, lettuce, salads, vegetables, fruits. We're working extensively in California, working with your growers. I'm sure some of them are. And the technologies they're using are these technologies to use these principles in order to lower their input costs. And they can do that, there was a previous comment that it takes 6 years to recoup the cost. That's not true at all. We're seeing significant savings by year 2, certainly by year 3. So the same principles apply.
Okay, let me pivot to Ms. Knotts. Would you agree?
for holding this hearing that's so important. It's such a pressing issue, and really appreciate our witnesses being here today to share your expertise. I very much appreciate the testimony given and the discussions around how much our environment's been affected by climate change and how substantial that cost has been. Jim, you noted in your testimony the increasing number of climate events that result in costs exceeding $1 billion, and what a shocking 22 events last year. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, those events have become all too common for folks back in my home state of Iowa. We're the ones who had the derecho sweep across our state. And when Iowans don't know what a storm should be called, it's definitely something out of the ordinary. And of course, we saw millions of farmland destroyed, left hundreds of thousands of Iowans without power. And then just a year prior to that, in southwest Iowa, in my district, we saw devastating flooding along the Missouri River, which destroyed homes and farmland up and down the river. And honestly, we simply cannot afford to accept that these events are the norm, and we have to take action on this climate crisis to reduce our carbon emissions and build up resiliency so that our farmers can be successful. So my first question is to you, Mr. Brown. Thank you so much for sharing with the committee the successes that you and others have experienced as a result of sound soil health practices. And I was reading your written testimony. I was taken by the story of Mr. Adam Grady from North Carolina. 2 weeks after waters receded from Hurricane Florence, Mr. Grady was already seeding his fields. Like Mr. Grady, farmers in Iowa are facing increasing challenges combating excess moisture each year as a result of more frequent wet springs. Mr. Brown, can you just take a moment to describe how the soil health practices can help farmers adapt to floods and a changing climate more broadly?
Well, thank you. That is an excellent question. And I'm going to hold up this jar to signify this is actually soybean seed in a jar. But think of it as soil aggregates. So a soil aggregate is just like one of these seeds. It's a little pad of sand, silt, and clay bound together. Water, your infiltration rates of water depend on those soil aggregates. A soil aggregate will only last about 4 weeks, and then new ones need to be built. In order to build new ones, you have to have soil biology, you have to have mycorrhizal fungi. We were holding a Soil Health Academy there in southeastern Iowa, and they were bragging about the very rich soils of eastern Iowa. Unfortunately, they had a 1/2 inch of rain, and that water could not infiltrate. You mentioned the flooding problems we're seeing along the Missouri, Mississippi rivers here in North Dakota, the Red River. Year after year, we combat that. What we need to do to alleviate that is build soil aggregates. We can help alleviate our flooding, alleviate those costs that occur year after year, as you said, to society if we focus on the resiliency of our soils. We are not doing that anymore. I travel extensively, all 50 states, and I have taken soil test after soil test after soil test that shows that we no longer have the ability to infiltrate water. In 2009, we had a major rainfall event on my ranch. We had 12.6 inches of rain in 6 hours. The next day, I could go out in my fields and drive across them with the tractor and not leave a rut. It's all about biology and building back resiliency through soil health. In Iowa, they can certainly do that with the wonderful resources you have there.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's inspiring to hear this, and thank you. As your work as a farmer and educator takes you around the country, as you mentioned, what do you think are some of the biggest reasons that you hear from farmers that prevent them from adopting these soil health practices? And what technical and financial resources do you think are needed for us to encourage to scale adoption of these practices?
That's a wonderful question, one I get asked daily. Number one reason is fear. Farmers and ranchers, it's fear of the unknown. You know, again, it goes back to education. The second is the current farm program. The current farm program, I'm sorry, but it is not conducive to adopting these practices. We make small steps through NRCS and that, but then the production model is wrong. We're on a path through Risk Management Agency where the crop seeded revenue insurance determines 95% of what farmers and ranchers plant. because they have to obtain operating money, operating notes from the bank in order to stay in production that year, that bank's going to tell them you have to take part in this program, and then you have to plant those crops that will allow you the greatest return through risk management. Don't get me wrong, we need crop insurance, we need risk management, but it has to be changed.
Thank you, Ms. Knox, and I'd have to say go Gators, just because, well, you know why. Now, Mr. Brown, as you know, many American farmers are ready and willing to participate in carbon sequestration and implement regenerative agriculture. I've seen a clear desire to embrace these practices in my home state of Florida. However, I have also seen farmers frustrated by the prohibited costs associated with implementation. In my district alone, we have producers that are forced to spend anywhere from to the tune of $300,000 just to participate in a carbon sequestration program. In your opinion, how can we make carbon sequestration and other green infrastructure investments more affordable for America's producers?
Well, they should not be participating in that program if it's costing that. It's about much more than carbon. Farmers and ranchers need to be paid for all ecosystem services. We're talking about carbon, but it's much more than that. It's clean air, clean water. It's taking nutrients out of the watersheds, holding them onto the farm where they belong. The way to do that is using the USDA programs to incentivize best use practices and to educate those farmers and ranchers.
Thank you. And Mr. Schellenberger, you have done a tremendous amount of research and work developing your book, Apocalypse Never. Since I have about 40 seconds left on the clock, I'd like to give you my remaining 30 seconds to give an elevator pitch as to why people should read your book and what the biggest takeaway is.
Well, thanks for